Thank you, Dr. Nass. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of Children's Health Defense. I'm involved locally in the DC, Virginia, and Maryland chapters and activist groups. And I'm such a fangirl of CHD TV that I have friends come over to my house every Monday night to watch CHD documentaries. We've been watching Never Again Is Now. We, of course, watch the Anthony Fauci documentaries, and we're going to keep getting together and celebrating the fantastic work that Children's Health Defense does. So proud to be here with you all today. So let's get started. Is there a plot to replace real farms with fake food? I think by the end of today's sessions, you probably will agree with us that there is. My biggest question was, how long has this been going on? Who's behind it, and how do we stop them? So the short answer to that question is it's been going on for a pretty long time. Milk was pasteurized in the 1800s. The first mandatory milk pasteurization laws, the first one was in Chicago in 1908. Then, of course, we saw other things, other industries go synthetic. Of course, we replaced horses with cars. Rubber was synthesized. That was a huge government effort. It wasn't a creation of the free market. And we've seen things like butter be substituted with margarine. So in a sense, this whole fake food phenomenon is not necessarily new, but it took the powers that be a very, very long time, a few generations to accomplish it. And it's the usual people behind it. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was intrigued to see that there were Council on Foreign Relations members, CIA operatives, government bureaucrats, corporate foundations, of course, each using our money, our public tax dollar money for their private interests. And I want to cut to the chase and just let you all know that there is something you can do right now, today, to turn this around. And the best thing we can all do, of course, you can produce your own food, and we're going to have fantastic panelists led by Zen Honeycutt on that subject. But we can just buy in cash, preferably, direct from local farmers. And Organic Consumers Association, where we work, or where I work, we have a relationship with Regeneration International, which has created a regenerative farm map. So you can find that. It's not censored by Google yet. So you can just Google regenerative farm map to get that resource. And then I also recommend the Weston A. Price Foundation's network of raw milk co-ops. I've joined them here in the DC area, and I get all kinds of great produce, baked goods, vegetables, meat, in addition to raw milk. So these are great resources. It's something we can all do right away. So is there anything really wrong with all this cheap food that we've got in the supermarket? It tastes good. It's that great blend of salt, sugar, fat, artificial flavors. It's hard not to eat it. So what's wrong with it? The food's poisoned. These artificially flavored Franken foods, they're made from just three ingredients, basically: corn, soy, and wheat. And that includes animal products because that's what the animals are eating. They're eating mostly corn and a little bit of soy. These crops are genetically engineered. They're soaked with synthetic fertilizers, with pesticides, and they're made into really bad ingredients that are making us fat and sick, like high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated vegetable oils, and the factory farmed animal products. Our foods end up containing carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, pesticides, of course, antibiotics, growth hormones, chemicals, heavy metals. And then, of course, for anybody who wants to opt out of the poisoned food supply as we know it, the corporations are rushing to market completely synthetic foods. They are proteins made from genetically modified microorganisms that produce synthetic DNA. And that's what the future of food is, according to the corporations. So, of course, getting to that food system that we have today required the eradication of family farms. That's still happening. Farmers commit suicide at twice the rate of other professions. They commit suicide even more often than veterans, who we know are another very troubled group of people. So it's still ongoing. There are still family farms to save. In 2021, we lost 7,000 farms and 1.3 million acres. And very alarmingly, the United Nations says that by 2075, because of the way we farm, we could be completely out of soil. And of course, again, the corporations have this fix for us, the lab grown foods, but I don't think that's going to improve human health. Right now, we're already in the United States hungry, malnourished, and sick. 1 in 5 Americans don't get enough to eat. 85% of us aren't getting enough nutrients in our diet. And half of us are suffering from a preventable chronic diet related illness. This shocks me. We have, you know, people don't like to eat their vegetables, I guess, but 91% of us don't eat 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per day, according to our federal government. But when you look at the government stats on this, the U.S. Department of Agriculture admits they've only got 1.7 cups of vegetables per person for us, including imports. So we're not doing well with our farm system to produce healthy foods. Only 0.4%, 4/1000th of the farmland in the United States is used to grow vegetables. Corn is king in the US, and there is a fantastic documentary from several years back. It's called King Corn, and there's a great trailer. This is also not censored. You can get it on YouTube. Great trailer where the kids who make the documentary, they go in to a scientist who tests their hair and shows them that all of the carbon in their body originated in corn because the corn feeds the animals. The corn is the sweetener, the corn is the oil, the corn's in everything. So I'd like to take you back to the New Deal because I had a bit of confusion about this personally. I was, trained by really good regenerative organic farmers in the history of fair prices for farmers. And I was led to believe that there was a golden era during the New Deal and post World War II where farmers were getting fair prices. But I learned when I looked a little bit more closely and more skeptically at this history that actually the USDA had a plot that they launched officially in 1944. Their post war policies for agriculture included getting rid of 4 million farms. They said today there are 6 million farms, but 84% of our farm products are coming from 1/3 of those farms. And so we should direct the surplus manpower into productive non agricultural activities. Directing surplus manpower, in other words, means getting rid of farms and farmers. And astoundingly, eerily predictive, this report was there were 6 million farms. They thought that 2/3 of them were unproductive, and today 2/3 of them were gone. But this confused me a little bit because this policy was in 1944. And that's when FDR was still alive. I had always been told that the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, one of the New Deal programs, was what pulled family farms out of the Depression and what made sure that farmers got a fair price for their produce even after World War II for, a couple decades afterwards. And and yet it seems like this whole program, which created the Commodity Credit Corporation, was really just a program that was actually designed to make sure that the grain traders and the grain processors and the factory farms that were buying the grain that they could get a fair price, right? So, in some ways you can say, well, it was fair for farmers and good for business. Business was very concerned that farm relief bills in Congress would crush them, and so no, that's not really how it turned out. So the grain reserve that the government controlled prevented crop prices from rocketing during drought or low production, and especially during World War II. Because what had happened in World War I was that there was extreme price volatility. Prices went sky high during the war. Farmers gained a lot of economic and political power during World War I in the United States. And so I think in 1933, the government was just as concerned about protecting prices for buyers of grain as they were for ensuring that farmers got a fair deal. It's not that I don't support fair prices for farmers, but we have to think about what the alternatives were and who these programs were actually for. If we can deal with this fact that in 1944, before the war was even over, while FDR was still alive, while farmers were doing everything that they could for the war effort, the USDA was already planning for demise for two-thirds of them. So I wanted to show you the book that I got that history from. It's Foodopoly by Winona Hauter. She's the executive director of an organization I admire greatly, Food and Water Watch. But she leaves a little bit out of the history. There is an important and scary history during the New Deal when, in the name of stabilizing prices in 1933, when people were lining up round the block, down the street, in bread lines all over the United States, people were hungry and poor. The government spent $31 million to buy and dispose of 6.4 million hogs and forced farmers to plow under 10.4 million acres of cotton. And that's just, there's not a whole lot of good documentation on this. So I know that this happened more across the country. This photo here on the right is of cattle being trucked to pits where they were buried and disposed of. This is just unconscionable. So no government policy that includes destroying farm produce when people are hungry, that there's something inherently wrong with that. And then we had a case in 1942, Wickard v. Filburn. I'm a lawyer. We studied this case. Everybody learns it. And you're told that, the courts had to do this. They had to assert a very broad power over interstate commerce in order to later do things like civil rights laws. And so you're kind of brainwashed into thinking, okay, it was for the best. But think about this individual farmer pictured to the left. That is Roscoe C. Filburn. He was told he would have to destroy or pay a penalty for growing excess wheat, even though the wheat was never in interstate commerce. He didn't even sell the wheat. He only fed it to his own animals. But the Supreme Court ruled that he should pay a very hefty fine for his overproduction of wheat, which they said would, create more price volatility and prevent farmers from getting a fair price. Are there alternatives to parity, to supply management, or to federal systems of guaranteeing a fair price for farmers? Back in World War I, when the farmers gained the economic independence that high grain prices gave them, they organized politically. There was a national nonpartisan league, and in 1916, it swept elections, especially in North Dakota. And they had a very simple platform. They said they wanted to own their own grain elevators. They wanted to cash their receipts for their grain in their own banks. They wanted ownership. And unfortunately, the period of political power for farmers in this era was too short, and they did not accomplish these things. And then when the federal government stepped in, of course, we had the crash in the 20s. When the federal government stepped in, it was not to increase ownership for farmers. It was to set up this temporary plan for fair prices. So it was one of these you'll own nothing and be happy situations. Reading these old documents, they sound just like what the World Economic Forum writes today. It's all for democracy, equity, and inclusion. But by the way, we're going to have to own and control everything, but it'll be fine for you. We're going to make sure you have fair prices. And this image is an image from one of there were several years of these tractorcades, farmers driving thousands of miles to Washington, D.C. to try to reinstate the parity programs that had been yanked from them in the 1950s. And so it did not work out. These were temporary programs. They were designed to be yanked away when the moment was right for industry and the government. And that's what happened, unfortunately. I would support parity if there was a political movement for it. We thought we could win it. And I would never say I'm against parity, but we have to understand the difference between these national federal systems and what might be achieved by farmer ownership. Who is behind this? All right, so this history comes from Winona Hodder's book, Foodopoly. And I'm just going to tell you about one very interesting man who ran a group called the Committee for Economic Development. These were the great resetters of the day. And Paul Hoffman came out of industry. He was the CEO at Studebaker. He first had the job of the Marshall Plan. And I'd love to read this to you. There's not time for it, but you should check out this old book. It was from the time. It's called Labor and the Marshall Plan. And there's a chapter on the Marshall Plan as a war plan. And it makes an eloquent argument that the Marshall Plan was really corporate welfare. It had very little to do with rehabilitating Europe and everything to do with offering new markets for US corporations. So this was his job. And I saw when I researched him that he had a lot of correspondences with Alan Dulles at the CIA. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, I know Alan Dulles, he was a corporate lawyer before heading the CIA. So, but I just figured I'd look into it. Is there a big link between the Marshall Plan and the CIA? There's a whole book written about it. The author is Sally Pisani. It's called The CIA and the Marshall Plan. And apparently, according to Wikipedia and very mainstream sources, at least 5% of the money that was mostly going to US corporations in the Marshall Plan went directly to the CIA. So scary stuff. And so Paul Hoffman, he does the Marshall Plan. Then he's put in charge of the Committee for Economic Development. He's the brain child that was, or he was the person who came up with these government plans, fed them to the government to get rid of the farmers. And where does he go next after this? He goes to the Ford Foundation and he's in charge of the Green Revolution in India. This photo is worth 1,000 words. Barefoot Indian youth spraying pesticides on pretty puny looking monocultures. And so this is what Paul Hoffman was in charge of after the Marshall Plan and after coming up with this plan for getting rid of US farmers. And then here's an interesting memo from the CIA. Economist Max Millikan on CIA letterhead has a list of projects in 1951 that he would like the Ford Foundation to work on. And he notes it is impossible to design intelligent programs of economic assistance, political reorientation, or psychological warfare without knowing a great deal more than we know about Indonesia, Indochina, India, Pakistan, Iraq, etc. So this, the Green Revolution, it didn't just disrupt agriculture, drive peasant farmers off of their land in India. It was also being used by the CIA to work on disrupting the democracy of India, or such as it was in 1951. All right, and then same guy. These people, they get around, they do similar things. Here's a May 1970 article from Ramparts magazine decrying the fact that Paul Hoffman, who had done all of these things previous and was president of the Ford Foundation, was suggesting that the United Nations Development Program that he now directed should get into population control. So I don't think that I'm being too hysterical to believe that the food system created in the United States and globally was designed to do exactly what it has done, make us hungry, malnourished, and sick. So to wrap up, I'd just like to reiterate this single solution, which goes so far: buy food in cash, direct from local farmers.